All right, welcome to the conversation. We got a great guest for you guys. His name is Wisdom Cole. He's the interim national director of youth and college at the NAACP. Wisdom, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
No problem. So I know one of the issues you care about is canceling student debt. First, before we get into the specifics of why that affects African Americans more, what was Biden's promise and what has he done so far?
On the campaign trail, Biden promised, a lot of young people and people who were interested in thinking about voting for him to cancel student debt, at least at a minimum of $10,000 for all federal loans. And we have not seen that yet. We've seen a lot of cancellation for niche groups, which has been really great and important, but we definitely need to see more widespread cancellation, at least at a minimum mark of $50,000 for all borrowers who qualify.
So what do you mean by niche groups, just so folks at home understand?
People who were defrauded by for-profit colleges. And so as folks may have seen those commercials back in the day from ITT Tech and such, people who were involved in those systems that actually also targeted Black borrowers in general. So we saw that happen quite early, which is really great and gives us hope that there's going to be more cancellation of student debt. But there definitely needs to be some more systems put in place to ensure that more borrowers have the opportunity to see this affect their own selves.
Okay, makes sense. So Wisdom, a question that a lot of folks at home might have if they're not familiar with the topic is, why does this affect Black folks more than the average American and the average student?
Well, I think what's really important to think about in the cancellation of student debt movement, particularly for Black borrowers, that Black borrowers oftentimes acquire more debt, and due to wage unemployment inequities and labor markets and different things that happen basically within the wage gap, Black borrowers are oftentimes borrowing from a weaker economic basis. They oftentimes attend underfunded colleges, universities, and struggle to repay and underpaying and underemploying labor markets. And so when you're recognizing the inequalities within the repayment program and process, you're going to see a lot of inequalities that exacerbate current issues that exist within the Black community.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different numbers thrown around, but one of the numbers I saw says that on average, white students owe about $28,000, a little over $28,000, and Black students owe more than $52,000 of student debt. So I'm afraid that the right wing takes numbers like that and twists it into the opposite of reality. But why is that? Why do Black students on average wind up owing more debt?
The simple fact is that people who have money aren't taking out loans, right? People who have a weaker economic basis have to take out loans, right? You have to take out loans to survive, oftentimes to even pay for school, to pay for tuition, to pay for food, to pay just for living expenses on campuses. And then when you even look into some of these programs, oftentimes you see that students who are coming from out of state, students who don't necessarily have the same opportunities within the state that they are going to school in, don't have the chances to actually support themselves. And so Black borrowers oftentimes have to take out more loans just to make sure they're able to make it through their first year. And then if they make it through their first year, it's a consistent battle year after year to ensure that they have money to stay in college.
Yeah, I wanted to drive that point home because look, my family's lived a different version of this from way back in the day. So my dad's side of the family had no money at all, and they were poor farmers down in southeastern Turkey, and they had a lot of debt. And so the wealthier folks in town would be like, oh yeah, look at those poor folks with all their debt. Well, that's because it turns out my grandfather had a very serious health condition which killed him when he was really young, and my dad was only 9 months old. And they incurred a lot of debt trying to treat him, to try to save his life. And the reason they didn't pay out of cash is because they didn't have any cash, right? They didn't, and so that, now bring it back to America. A lot of folks have talked about this, so I've got to ask you about the frustration. African American voters delivered for Biden and the Democrats more than anyone did, literally as a percentage of the population, and certainly in critical states like Georgia. And this seems to be yet another promise made and not kept. So are you hopeful that it's going to be kept at some point, or have you begun to get very frustrated at Biden's intransigence on this?
I think there are strides to actually make this happen for Black borrowers, make this happen for all of America, right? Because we recognize that cancellation of student debt would help boost the economy for everybody. And so I think that there is really great progression and strides to making this happen. I think that if we really want to see a change for Black America in the upcoming future, cancellation of student debt must be a top priority for the Biden administration. Recognizing, as you said, right, Black people, Black borrowers, Black folks turned out in numbers. And so if we want to make sure that we are keeping accountable to the words that were said on the trail, to the words that were said to Black people across the nation, and if we really believe that we are going to be pushing forward for economic justice, this has to happen. Economic justice is racial justice. And I think for Black borrowers, this gives them an opportunity to become homeowners, to become business owners, to really determine the future of their freedom and making sure that they have the opportunity to provide for their families and even send their kids to college in the future.
Yeah, and I want people to understand this. We talked about this in the town hall with Nina Turner over the weekend in Cleveland. When you cancel student debt, I don't want people to mistake what we're saying here as like it's only going to go to Black borrowers. No, it cancels student debt for everybody. White, Black, Asian, it doesn't matter, right? And so, yes, these issues sometimes affect Black Americans more, right? Whether it's this or it's our insane privatized healthcare insurance system, it's lower wages and on the minimum wage, et cetera. But when you raise the minimum wage, you don't just raise it for Black folks, you raise it for everybody, right? When you do Medicare for all, everybody gets free healthcare, including Republicans, right? And so it really does affect a broad cross section. So Biden promised 10,000. You argue for 50,000. Why 50,000 as the number?
Right, so we see research shows us that 50,000 is definitely the number necessary to make a significant difference for Black borrowers and borrowers of color. We've even seen that higher numbers such as 75,000 is going to even be even better. But recognizing that at a minimum of 50,000, we'll see a difference, as well as other specific loan borrower carve-outs, such as the end of interest payments on low payments, reducing the timeline for loan forgiveness programs, because the system that actually is in operation right now around income repayment isn't working, right? You have 8 million people who have been enrolled in different loan repayment programs and seeing only 32 people actually get their student loans canceled. That shows us that these systems that we are opting into are not working. We have to make sure we have a significant enough difference to make sure that people have a base to start from, right? Recognize that this is going to boost the economy, this is going to help us, this is going to support us. And so rather than putting just a minimum, let's go all out. Let's make sure that everybody has an opportunity for a just and free future.
Yeah, so Wisdom, I know this is going to be a tough question to answer, but let me do a prelude to it real quick. So along the lines of what I just said on the other issues, on police reform, which I know is another top issue for you in criminal justice reform. Again, Biden's dragging his feet, not doing much. And the prelude that I have to it is that I'm from a Muslim background. I was at a mosque recently, and I heard this great sermon about how, and there was, of course, a couple of Black Muslims in the mosque, but it was mainly Middle Eastern and white goers, and the person delivering the sermon was also of Middle Eastern origin. And he said, I want you to go thank a Black person today. Because if it wasn't for Black civil rights leaders, us Muslims wouldn't have the rights that we have now. We wouldn't have the protections that we have now, right? And so understand all that Black folks suffered in this country to help all of us, okay? So along those lines, you're with the NAACP. At what point do you guys go to gather allies, Black, brown, white, it doesn't matter, and go, no, we're gonna have to hold this guy accountable? Because when Manchin does it and Sinema does it and the Republicans does it, he bends over backwards. But promises were made and promises need to be kept.
Exactly, and that is the history of the NAACP. We have always worked in solidarity with other oppressed communities, making sure that we recognize that for us to be free, everybody everywhere must be free, right? As somebody who deeply believes in the acts of solidarity and people showing up for one another, it's necessary for us to work hand in hand to make this happen. As we know that cancellation of student debt is progress for everybody. The more that we cancel, the more progress that we'll see in America. The more we'll see people have discretionary funds to help support their own endeavors and whatever futures they want to see within this country. And so, if we really want to have a hope of walking hand in hand and making sure that we are advocating for all, we must reach out to each other. We must work with one another, and we must show up for each other, even when it's difficult.
Right. So the difficult part of that question, of course, is when, right? When, and I know that you don't have the answer ahead of time, right? But has there been talks internally? Is when you get to a point where you go, it looks like Biden's not going to do it, and we're going to have to put pressure on?
Yeah, well, I think in this moment in time right now, we know that there is a pause on student loan repayments that ends on September 30th. And so in this moment in time, we actually need to put the pressure on really quickly, because once that pause is stopped, there's going to be a bunch of folks who have to pay back their student loans and might not have the means to do that. And as we said before, this system that we operate in isn't working. And so if the Biden administration hopes to really support and show up for the Black community and show up for the allies and show up for the people who supported him along this entire campaign trail, it's really important that in this period of time that everybody join the fight, that everybody gets involved, that everybody shares their stories, right? Something that I've been talking about with the Biden administration, with the Education Secretary Cardona, is the need to hear the stories about how student debt has affected all of us, right? There's people who have graduated from college, or people who went to college and didn't even graduate. There's parents, there's young people who haven't even started their college journey yet, who has been affected by this issue of cancellation of student debt. And so it's necessary that in this moment in time, that we all join in, that we all jump in, that we all share our stories and all do what we can to make sure that this issue actually gets resolved.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Yeah. And by the way, it's not just about liberating people, and that's enough on its own, but it also has tremendous economic benefits for the whole country, because it liberates people to spend money on houses, cars, and so many other things, and it helps improve the economy. All right, Wisdom Cole with the NAACP, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching the Young Turks. I really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.